Hi, everybody. Let's wait for everybody to get in here. And let me see if I'm kind of off center here. Let me center myself a little bit. So let's wait for everybody to get in here. I know the notifications just went out. So it's going to take a minute. And woo-wee, what a day. Oh, my God. You guys come on in. Take off your shoes. Relax. We are going to leave the day behind, and we're going to talk about some creepy history. So this is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm super excited about it. I figured this would be the best way to start out the new year with a exciting, very, very interesting, at the top of most people's lists when it comes to creepy history. Hello, Liz. How are you doing? And thank you, Frank and Liz, for modding tonight. I really, really do appreciate it. Hi, Genevieve. And everybody, go check out the Creepy Parlor. Genevieve is one of our newest content creators. So we're super excited. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is doing well. Hope you had a good New Year's Eve. And we're going to relax. Today has been a crazy day. So we're going to kick off our shoes, turn out the lights, and we're going to get ready for some creepy history. And as you can tell, we are going to be covering the Black Death European tour from 1347 to 1351, but I actually think it went on a little bit longer than that. So, hi, Carl. How are you? And he says, you're a lot bigger on a 21-inch than a 6. Yes, I'm huge. I am monster, Odd Mama. So, well, you are most welcome, Genevieve. We are super excited to have you. So tonight, for anyone that may not know, we are going to be covering a plague that, of all the plagues we've probably had in recorded history, really fits the definition of plague. It's now referred to as the Black Death. Hi, Zool. But we're going to be talking about the Great Mortality, the Great Pestilence. And it is a very interesting subject. Hopefully you will learn something new that you did not know. And John says he has my autograph. Yes, I remember that. And we're going to talk about why this particular plague rocked the medieval world. Because like I said, it fit the word plague. This was your definition of plague. So if you guys are ready, I'm going to pop into the chats real quick, and then we're going to get started. Let's see. So John asked, how am I feeling today? I am feeling well. I'm still getting over a bad case of bronchitis that I had about 2 weeks ago. So my voice is still a little raspy when I talk a lot. So you guys just hang in there with me. And then Carl says super scary. Yeah, it's quite interesting. And every time I do research, and this is some heavy research, I always learn a little bit myself. You know, even on things that I've known a lot about over time, I always wind up learning something new. So I hope you guys do too. And then Tom said, hi, beautiful mother. Hello, Tom. How are you? And let's see. And then we said, hello, Zool. Okay, let's pop out of here and we'll go ahead and get started. All right, so the information that I'm using today is actually based on it's a 24-part lecture by a Dr. Dorsey Armstrong, PhD. She is a professor of English and medieval literature at the Purdue University. She received her PhD in medieval literature from Duke University in 1998 and her BA in English and creative writing from Stanford University. Now, of all the information that I've read over the years, I have found Dr. Armstrong's research to be the most comprehensive as far as information and getting a good kind of well-rounded view of the Great Pestilence than really any one book or maybe sets of books that I have read. She is on great courses. They do offer that through Prime for, I think, $7.99 a month. So if you like research, if you like things like that, then it's a really good, it's worth the $7.99. So let's do this. All right. So in the middle of the 14th century, one of the most devastating events in human history, wiped out, some estimate, up to half of the European population. It raged from 1346 to 1353. In the end, the pandemic resulted in the deaths of up to anywhere from 75 to 200 million people. So that's a lot of people, guys. That's a whole lot of people. Now, known at the time, it was either known as the Great Mortality, the Great Pestilence, or even the Blue Sickness. It would actually not be called the Black Death until centuries later. And this was really not based on any symptom, like a lot of people think, that it's called the Black Death because of certain symptoms that the plague would give the victims. It really refers to as a black time in history. So their usage of black is different than like what we see in this particular case, and we're going to get into that here in just a minute, what this particular type of the Great Pestilence is. So, because there is many, not just one. So the plague that raged through the 14th century Europe, great years to be in the funeral business. Maybe. I don't even know how well the funeral people fared in this. This was pretty devastating. So the plague raged through the 14th century, changed almost every aspect of the medieval world. And it even, in essence, shaped the very world that we know today. So our lives and the world we know today would probably not be like it is now, or quite delayed if it had not been for the Great Pestilence. The art of this period showed the bleakness of the situation. Drawings were morose and full of death and destruction. The 14th century plague that would ravage the world first reared its head in the eastern city of Kaffa in 1347. From there, it would move westward, then northward through Europe, finally turning back east, ending up almost where it had started. So that by 1353, quoting historian David Herlihy, the plague had almost closed a deadly noose around Europe. Though similar to the 1541 Justinian plague, which killed up to 40% of the population and bringing to an end what we know as the Great Roman Empire, and the 1894 plague, or the Hong Kong plague, which actually gave us our first real knowledge into the bacterium Yersinia pestis. The Great Pestilence of the 1340s is now believed to have been something altogether different and much more deadly. Hi, Mikey. How are you? Come in, relax. It's been a long day. We're getting into some creepy history. All right, where did I end? So yeah, it was a lot different than both the Justinian plague and the 1894 plague, which both were plagues by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, or Y. pestis, as some people refer to it. Now, an account of the pestis, or the Great Pestilence, at the imperial city has come from the pen of the emperor, and I'm going to be quoting some what they refer to, and there's not very many, of eyewitnesses of what happened during the Great Pestilence, or the Black Death. So this actually came from the pen of the Emperor John Cantacuzene, who was an eyewitness to actually what he's reporting. Now, the epidemic, which was 1347, raged in northern Scythia, he writes, traversed almost the entire seacoast, whence it was carried over the world. For it invaded not only Pontus, Thrace, and Macedonia, but Greece, Italy, the islands, Egypt, Libya, Judea, Syria, and almost the entire universe. The disease, according to his account, was incurable. Neither regularity of life nor broadly strength was any preservation against it, he quotes. Let me take a sip. The strong and the weak were equally struck down, and the death spared not those of whom care was taken, any more than the poor, desolate of any help. No other illness of any sort showed itself this year. All sickness took the form of the prevalent disease. Medical science recognized that it was powerless before the foe. The course of the malady was not in any case the same. Some people died suddenly, others during the course of a day, and some after an hour's suffering. Hi, Jigs, how are you? In the case of those who lingered for 2 or 3 days, the attack commenced with a violent fever. Soon the poison mounted to the brain, and the sufferer lost the use of speech, became insensible to what was taking place around him, and appeared sunk in a deep sleep. If by chance he came to himself and tried to speak his tongue refused to move, and only a few inaccurate sounds could be uttered. As the nerves had been paralyzed when he died, then he died suddenly. Hello, Calvin, how are you? Others who fell sick under the disease were attacked first, not in the head, but in the lungs. The organs of respiration became quickly inflamed. Sharp pains were experienced in the chest. Blood was vomited, and the breath became fetid. The throat and tongue, burned by excessive fever, became black and congested with blood. Those who drank copiously experienced no more relief than those who drank but little. Then, after describing the terrible sleeplessness and restlessness of some sufferers, the plague spots which broke out over the body in most cases, the emperor proceeds. And those were referred to as the sign in a lot of the death logs of the plague pits. Let's see. The few who recovered and had no second attack, or at least not of a serious nature. Even some of those who manifested all the symptoms recovered against every exception. It is certain that no efficacious remedy has been discovered. What had been useful to one appeared a real poison to another. People who nursed the sick took their malady. Yes, they were naked. I saw boobies. Took their malady, and on the accounts of their death multiplied to such an extent that many houses remained deserted, after all who had lived in them, even the domestic animals, had been carried off by the plague. This profound discouragement of the sick was especially sad to behold, and this is still his account. On the first symptoms of the attack, men lost all hopes of recovery and gave themselves up as lost. This moral prostration quickly made them worse and accelerated the hour of their death. Now, sadly, the human behavior when it came to dealing with plague victims was really not any better. People, after the onset of symptoms, were a moral danger to those around them. In some cases, family members abandoned sick loved ones, even children. Their deaths were noticed only when neighbors smelled the rotting corpses. An Italian chronicle or chronicler, Angelino di Tura, recorded his experience from Siena. One citizen avoided another. Hardly any neighbor troubled about others. Relatives never or hardly ever visited each other. Sounds kind of, I don't know. Sounds like recent events. Anyway, moreover, such terror was struck into the hearts of men and women by this calamity, that brother abandoned brother, and the uncle his nephew, and the sister her brother, and very often the wife her husband. What is even worse and nearly incredible is that fathers and mothers refuse to see and tend to their children as if they had not been theirs. For this illness seemed to strike through the breath and sight, and so they died, and none could be found to bury the dead for money or for friendship. So let's see what's going on in the comments real quick. Because like I said, I've got a lot here, so we're going to try not to take up 2 hours of your time. And this is just part 1, mind you. So let's see what's going on in the comments. Let's see what's going on. Let's see. So Jig says, Odd Mother, always the best scary stories. Well, I am so glad you enjoy them. And this is a subject I have been wanting to cover for a very, very long time. But I have to be honest, it's a little intimidating for anybody that does podcasts or anything like that. When it comes to like creepy history, there's some that we really want to do, but you're like, oh my God, all the history and rabbit holes. Yeah. So, but I have been wanting to do this for a long time. But thank you. Hi, Rebecca. How are you? Hi, Mary Beth. Let's see. Hi, Sykes. Oh, and look, guys. Just this is a side note. The winners, and Sykes, you reminded me, the winners of the Krampus feed. Remember, those are going to be going out at the first of the year. It's now the first of the year. So we're getting everything together. If you did not send your mailing address to Psycho Bunny Death Cult or Psycho Bunny DC, that's where you need to send it. We had to do some maintenance on the P13 site, and so we lost a lot of emails. So make sure if you were a winner of the Krampus feed that you get us your mailing address to one of those DMs so that we can have it so we can mail out your prize. All right, let's see. So Carl says, do I ruin something if I say that I've heard that this is where, from the era that bless you comes from? Yes, a lot of times, what was it? If you sneezed more than 3 times, you were considered a plague bearer, or that's how they looked at you. And then Chris says, we need a new plague. Well, let's surely hope it doesn't go the way of this one, because this was horrendous. This was absolutely horrendous, and there were no painless deaths. So just keep that in mind, Chris, when you say we need a new plague. Doesn't matter which form of the great pestilence you got, it was not painless. Let's see. And then Maud says, I will be taking a little longer to get the pictures out. Yes, as she has COVID and we don't want any contaminated cooties. So thank you very much. And I'm sure everybody understands. Yes, and we do all hope that everybody feels better and that we hope you and Frank and Liz feel better. Yes, I am a Krampus man. Okay, so let's get going or we're going to be here 2 hours. All right. And we even had slideshows. So where are we at? All right. So as bad and as hopeless as it may have been described in medieval literature, art, and accounts, understand that it was probably much, much worse. As at this time, only 10 to 15% of the population were literate. meaning the full understanding and scape of what life was like during this time was never recorded. To understand the difference between the Great Pestilence and the earlier and later outbreaks, we need to get a general understanding of the plague itself. All right, so I did mention the bacterium Yersinia pestis, or Y. pestis, as some refer to it, was discovered in 1894 by Alexandre Yersin, a Swiss and French physician and bacteriologist from the Pasteur Institute during an epidemic of the plague in Hong Kong. People were skeletons. They were very, very active skeletons. The plague was also zoonotic, okay? A zoonotic, or zoonosis, is an infectious disease caused by a pathogen, an infectious agent such as bacterium, virus, parasite, or prion, that has jumped from a non-human animal, usually by no means always a vertebrate, to a human. The black rat, or ratus ratus, which I love to say because it just rolls off your tongue. Ratus ratus. All right, so ratus ratus, also known as the roof rat, the ship rat, or the house rat. It is a common long-tailed rodent of the stereotypical rat genus Rattus, and it is now found worldwide. So remember that. It is a resilient vector for many diseases because of its ability to hold on to many infectious bacteria in its blood. It played a primary role in the spreading of bacteria contained in fleas on its body. Also, part of the whole thing that comes together. They are adorable, and I had a ratus ratus when I was a teen, and I loved my little Joe Schmo. Joe Schmo was amazing. The oriental rat flea, or Exophilicia chinopus, and I probably boogered that up. I miss mine, Buford. Yes, I do. I miss mine too. It is an ectoparasite of small mammals and a vector of many diseases for which humans are incidentally hosts. Now, they do not like or prefer humans, but we can be hosts. And Tom is adorable too, but he is not a ratus ratus. So this species of flea is most widely known for carrion, the Y. pestis, and Rickettsia typhi. And we have talked about that before. The causative agents of the plague and murine typhus. We covered murine typhus when we were talking about the Pied Piper. So that was interesting. But to be an infected flea versus an infectious flea are different. So let's talk about fleas and flea stomachuses. So the flea has a stomach, and it is referred to as the ventriculus. The proventriculus is a valve that regulates the food that goes to the stomach. What happens with Y. pestis is it causes a blockage in the proventriculus, which makes the flea exceptionally hungry, because it basically is causing the flea to starve because the food cannot get to the flea's stomach. Now, eventually, the flea's body will catch on to what's going on. And in order to ingest food, it will regurgitate that blockage. And guess where the regurgitation or vomit goes? Yes, it goes into the bite site of the host. It is the regurgitation that causes the infection to the host, not necessarily the flea bite itself. And thus, the rat and flea mortality cycle begins. Like I said, humans are not normally the host. They do believe that the Y. pestis was actually in Eastern Europe for a few years prior to the outbreak in Kaffa. And we're going to talk about that in part 2. What caused that outbreak? Because that is interesting. Hi, Damon Bard. How are you? I hope you are feeling well tonight. But they are not normally hosts, but because of the blockage, the fleas will become exceptionally hungry and they will go after anything. As well as if they kill off the hosts, their normal tasty hosts, they're going to go to the next host that is closest. Now, to talk about the forms of the plague caused by the bacterium Y. pestis, and maybe you'll learn something, because most people believe or refer to it as the bubonic plague, but the bubonic or bubos were not the only variation of this particular bacteria. Let me wet my whistle. All right, so the 3 forms. If you caught the plague and you did not survive, the hostess who is closest. Did I miss something? What? I don't know. Yeah, I get you. Yes, the hostess that is closest. That's exactly what they go for. All right, so the first would be the bubonic plague. This would be swelling of lymph nodes in the neck, groin, and armpits. Now, it is not highly contagious, as some people believe, unless you try to lance the buboes, which unfortunately was one of the things that they tried. The pus from the buboes are extremely contagious, and it is extremely stinky to the point that it would cause people to vomit and run out of the room. It was supposed to be god awful, the smell of the pus. The next would be pneumonic. It's a respiratory form of the plague, easily transmitted. One would literally drown in one's own blood. You were lucky if you lasted 2 days. It is extremely painful, and you have about a 1% chance of recovery. And to go back to bubonic, you have anywhere from about a 10 to 30%, depending, when it came to actually getting over it. Now, if you caught the plague, you would probably want to catch the septicemic form of the Y. pestis bacterium. However, it is not fun either. It can start out as bubonic, but if it gets into the bloodstream, it will cause what is called disseminated intravascular coagulation. Yes, and that is as painful as it sounds, which is also referred to as DIC. What happens is tiny blood clots form in your blood, growing larger and larger until they eventually cut off circulation to different parts of your body. From there, those parts of the body start to die and turn black. Now, if it doesn't cut off the blood flow to your, like, a major organ like a heart or your brain or something like that, and you wither on for a few hours, because this particular form had a saying, you could be dancing at dawn and dead by dinner. So it was very, very quick. But if you did linger, once the blood clots actually, like, cut off circulation, then the blood will lose its ability to clot after that. And the blood will seep into other areas of the body, such as the skin and organs, almost like a hemorrhagic fever. And there are some thoughts on that. That's one of the reasons that they believe that this plague was so deadly, was because it was a bomb. It wasn't just Y. pestis that came with this particular plague, even though that's what it is mainly blamed on. But we're going to get into that and some really interesting information. So it would often, if this happened, it would often cause tiny red and black spots looking like a patchy rash or pimples all over the body. This would be referred to as the sign of the plague. And then you would vomit blood and you would die. Yes, dead by daylight or by dinner time, actually. This infection or form of the infection would normally last all of about 24 hours before succumbing to death. But what made this plague of the 1340s different? And that's what we're going to talk about. Let me check the plague. Let me check the chat real quick. And then yes, dead by Tawn, swallow your soul. Let's check the chats and see what's going on. Why Pestis? I don't know. I don't know, but it sounds cool. It sounds really cool. Let's see. Let's see. Trying to be Finny. Damn. Let's see. Butthead laugh. Oh yeah. Let's see. If this was going around, I'd be hiding in the basement for sure. Yeah, and there's other factors that made this particular period in time kind of a prime time for this to happen and for it to be so deadly. Yeah, it does. It makes you start to itch. It really, really does. They do, Carl. The little ratises always look so cute and cuddly. All right, so what made the 1340s plague so much different? Sheer speed, of course, and the fact that it is now believed the more that we do research, we have the bubonic plague here in Cook County and Los Angeles County. Yes, it has never gone away. On average, there is anywhere from about 5 to 15 cases in the United States within any given year. So if you do go, and it does seem to happen more in drier areas for whatever reason in the United States. So if you go hiking, and this is one thing I want to say, if you go hiking and you see signs that tell you not to get around animals or not to get around dead carcasses or to stay on the trail or something like that when it pertains to that kind of notice, understand that the Forestry Division have put up those notices because they have found, for whatever reason, there have been reports of Y. pestis in fleas in that area. So listen to those. Don't go poking shit with a stick if it tells you to stay away from carcasses, because that's the reason they're telling you that. It is rampant in Los Angeles and San Francisco right now as well. Yeah, and sometimes it can be hard to diagnose, and people can actually die from it in the United States even today, because it is just not that common. But yes, there has been an outbreak. All right, so sheer speed, of course, and not just the plague, because the plague usually moved. Excuse me. The plague usually moved in seasonal cycles, worst in the summer and disappearing in the winter. The 14th century plague did not do this, because what most would think, winter would be the most devastating, as people and fleas would be crowded into close quarters, which seemed to be the case concerning this particular plague. Now, they do believe that there may have also been attached to this particular strain of plague that was going around, possibly a virulent form of TB. It wasn't until much later that scientists proposed that it might have been even anthrax outbreak, which can show similar signs to all three forms of the plague. While other scientists believe there could have been some sort of cattle murine, as it said, as there are some reports and evidence that the sale of infected meat with cattle murine was sold in the Great Britain area prior to the plague showing up in that area. Now, we know that Y. pestis is a bacterium, but let's also talk about a zoonotic form that is a virus. That would be Ebola, or yes, HIV. Now, Ebola, there are different, there are different thoughts on how people catch it, but they do know that it's zoonotic. It moves from animal to human. The same with HIV. They believe that the first cases of HIV were from what they call bushmeat, which is the consumption of monkey or infected monkey, and I think it was a particular strain. Now, the interesting thing about this particular bubonic plague or Black Death or whatever you want to call it is that there's going to be some things about it that show up in today's science. So between 10 and 20% of those people descended from the medieval population of Western Europe have a genetic mutation that is known as, and write this down, is interesting. This mutation is called CCR5-delta 32. It is this mutation that carries a natural immunity to HIV. So the plague of the 14th century was something more than just the plague, but some type of hemorrhagic fever based on written references to plague symptoms. Those who survived the hemorrhagic form, they believe, are the ones that their descendants had formed antibodies that were passed down to their descendants. So if you caught this form of hemorrhagic fever, it is believed you are the ones that developed the genetic mutation known as CCR5-delta 32. And you can look it up. There's a lot of research going on right now for like inoculations against HIV because of this particular mutation. But if you survive that, then your descendants would have this mutation and more than likely would be immune to HIV, which is very interesting. I did not know this. They also believe that there may have been a viral form of smallpox of some type that was also moving along either in the first or second wave of the 1340s plague. It is believed that the plague came into Europe in, like I said, 2 distinctive waves and in 2 distinctive parts. And we're going to get into that later in another episode. A study published by PLOS Pathogens in 2010 found DNA and protein signatures from northern, central, and southern plague burial pits. And this came from the tooth pulp that, yes, they can still use to get DNA, that identified 2 different variations of the Yersinia pestis that are now believed to be extinct. In other words, they burned themselves out. And there is probably a reason for this. So Liz says, I wonder what mutation Frank says, I'm sorry, me and Liz will pass down from COVID. You know, it's a thought. Will this cause our descendants to have some sort of immunity against something else? I don't know. All right, so they did identify 2 different variations of the Y. pestis that are now believed to be extinct. They literally burnt themselves out. Many theorize that the plague of the late 1900s or the late 19th century was a naturally mutated and weakened form of the Y. pestis compared to the plague of the 14th century, as that plague seemed so virulent that over time it would have literally killed off the host population. So it would have killed off ratas, and it would have possibly killed off humans because it was so virulent. Unless, of course, you had some sort of protection. So we're going to talk about one of our favorites, the plague doctor. Now, the protective suit consisted of light and waxed fabric overcoat. It included a mask with glass eye openings and a beak-shaped nose, typically stuffed with herbs, straw, and spices. Yes, our beautiful plague doctor. They are so cool and creepy to look at. Plague doctors would also commonly carry a cane to examine and direct patients without the need to make direct contact with them. Though medieval reasoning was that the air had a miasma, through either a rudimentary understanding or pure dumb luck, this would be the first actual hazmat suit. And I will tell you, the impregnation of the fabric, normally with wax or even with tallow, which is like an animal fat, was often, from a lot of things that I've read about plague doctors, was used to be able to basically wash off any bodily fluids that may have gotten onto the plague doctor's clothing, which, again, through maybe some rudimentary understanding or even dumb luck on that, actually worked in a way to seal the fabric so that small particles could not get through it. So it was kind of, I don't know, it seemed more dumb luck to me, but you know, our descendants understood the natural world. They may just not have understood the scientific part of it, if that makes any sense. So that would be your first hazmat suit. Now, interestingly, unlike other plague outbreaks, the plague of the 1340s was not marked by any reference to a epidemic zoonotic event that happened right before. Now, we're going to get into some stuff in one of the other episodes that goes into climatic events, but there is no recorded history that we have of any zoonotic, large climate or zoonotic event, such as an earthquake or a volcano or something like that, that preceded the actual outbreak in Kaffa, which actually came from the Golden Horde, but we're going to get into that later. So what climatic event occurred in China that caused the rat population to move from its natural habitat and move into areas that it would come in contact with humans? The rat population had suddenly died off, fleas then jumping to the closest host, infecting humans, moving east to west along trade routes. In 2015, a study was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences stating rats actually may not have even been responsible for the outbreak. They seem to have the outbreak seems to have more of a correlation to Asian climates, which were wet springs and warm summers, where it is widely agreed that this was what was happening in the 14th century plague where it originated. So they had some wet springs and some warm summers. But these particular climate descriptions are not conducive or ideal for black rat breeding. So it wouldn't have been what you would consider a successful breeding season for the Rattus rattus because of the wet springs and the warm summers. Unless you look at another rodent that can carry these fleas, and that is the gerbil. So all you people out there whose kids have gerbils. Studies now are showing that during the periods of high gerbil population growth, this period was predictively followed by plague that moved westward along trade routes of Europe. Understanding why this plague was so deadly and also so transformative to the world we now know, we also need to get a general understanding of medieval Europe around the 1340s and what we're going to refer to as the eve of the Black Death. And let's see what's going on in the comments real quick, and then we're going to get into that. Yes, so John says plague doctors are popular this Halloween. They are. And in my circles, they've been popular for a really long time. But yeah, with all the Rona and stuff, yeah, they're real popular this year, or were. All right, and then Mark says that wouldn't happen to have been a certain former Australian-born corporal, would it? I'm missing something, or I'm not getting it. Give me a moment, and I will catch up, Mark. Genevieve says, I was hoping you were going to mention this. Yes, yes, we're going to talk about we talked about the if you're referring to the gerbils. Yes, and then we're going to talk about why this time may have been so ripe for a plague. Bye, Chris. Good night, and thank you for joining us. So Carl says, fun fact, this group is the same one that is the actual descendants of the old Aryans. Funner fact, a certain Australian dude. Oh, okay, I'm catching up. Hold on. Dude that was not a part of it, born too far south. Let's see. Yeah, lots of new trade routes. Chipmunks or gerbils. Let's see. Make sure I'm not missing anything real quick. Hold on. All right. Okay. So let's get into just kind of in general the 1340s, mid 1340s, which would be considered the eve of the Black Death. What we know about that particular time in general, and understand this is general in general because each area was a little bit different, but for the most part, CCR 5. Hold on just a second, Genevieve. I'll get it for you. I think it was CCR 5-Delta 32, I believe. Let me look. Hey, hold on, guys. CCR 5-Delta 32. So look that up. It's interesting. All right, let's get back to where we were. Okay, so we can, scholars kind of agree at that time, most of Europe was Christian, it was agrarian, and it was feudal. So let's talk about each one of those. So at that time, the church, there was no separation of church and state. It was not unusual for people to attend church daily, and even small mental tasks, such as boiling an egg, would be blessed. So from birth to death, whether a peasant, a noble, a lord, or a king, life was dominated by the church and medieval religion. Various religious institutions, such as monasteries and convents, became important, rich, and powerful. The lives of many medieval people, including various orders of monks and nuns, were dedicated to the Catholic Church and the religion. The medieval people believed that God was with them every moment of their lives, controlling their fate, lives, and judging them on their on their discretions or indiscretions, I should say. Now, an agrarian society or agricultural society is any community whose economy is based on producing and maintaining crops and farmland. In an agrarian society, cultivating the land is the primary source of wealth. Such as a society may acknowledge other means of livelihood and work habits, but they stress the importance of agriculture and farming. Now, feudalism. Gradually, the Roman system of villas and the agricultural estates using partially slave labor was replaced by what they call manorialism or serfdom. One of the differences between the villa and the medieval manor was that the agriculture of the villa was commercially oriented and specialized, while the manor was directed towards self-sufficiency. So you see what's kind of building up here. You have little areas that are, they want to be self-sufficient. Slavery was important for the agricultural labor force of the Roman Empire and died out in Western Europe around 1100. The slaves of the Roman Empire were property, like livestock, with no rights of personhood and could be sold or traded at the will of the owner. Similarly, the serf was tied to the land and could not leave his servitude, but his tenure on the land was secure. If the manor changed owners, the serf remained on the land. Serfs had limited rights to property, and although their freedom of movement was limited, they owed labor or rent to their lord. So the medieval population was divided into three groups. Those who pray, and these are called the three estates. Those who pray, those who fight, and those who work. The serf and the farmer supported with labor and taxes, the clergy who prayed, and the noble lords, knights, and warriors who fought. In return, the farmer received the benefits of a religion and protection by mounted and heavily armored soldiers. The church took their tithes, and the soldier required a large economic investment. With the end of the Carolingian Empire, which ran from 1800 to 1888, the power of the kings declined, and the central authority was little felt. The European countryside became a patchwork of small, semi-autonomous fiefdoms of lords and clergy ruling over a populace mostly of farmers, some relatively prosperous, some possessing land, and some landless. Now, of the three estates, and this is your quiz, kiddos, of the three estates, those who fight, those who pray, and those who work, what do you think the percentages of each were? Do you think they're 50, 50, 50? How do you think that's laid out? And I'll watch the chats real quick. I always like to do this. If you had to, yes, Delta 32. CCR, whatever, what did I say? Delta 32. So Carl says a manor owner typically had some interest in production and had a real personal stake in his property. Yeah, and a lot of times they had stake in what they would consider their tenants or serfs as well. You know, it wasn't always something horrible. It was like a symbiotic relationship, I guess. Farmers were 98%. You're absolutely correct. It was usually, there's different estimations, but those who fought were usually around 5%. Those who prayed were usually around 5%. Those who worked were anywhere from 90 to 98%. However, the 1340s were beginning to change, and we would see the rise in what is called the merchant class, or what we refer to as the middle class now. So understand, if it had not been for the plague and everything would have just kept going, it would have probably been several decades before feudalism came to an end. So due to global warming, a global warming period, start over. Due to a global warming period, a population boom occurred somewhere I can't even talk, between 1,000 and 1,300. This doubled the population. This led to a land crunch and a massive urbanization into places like London, Paris, Rome, Florence, and Milan. Now, the merchant class largely populated the new towns and the cities that sprang up and influenced the economy and social life of their societies. The towns attracted specialists such as grocers, spice merchants, cobblers, apothecaries, and goldsmiths who formed unions called guilds. These guilds set the prices for the goods they produced, as they were the only ones in the area creating this product in the area. Therefore, the citizens in this area were willing to pay whatever price they charged. Their control over these prices led to much of their control over the economy. The rise of the merchant class gained them access And this would be the first time that you would see in history that you could now start to move between classes. In feudalism, you cannot move between classes unless you are of the upper class, the ones who prayed, or the ones who fought. They could intermingle, kings, knights, dukes, all that kind of stuff, with the church, as the church was part, there was no separation of state and church. But the peasants could not until we see a rise of the merchant class. The rise of the merchant class gained them access to high society, and some became famous patrons of the arts, such as Chaucer. Merchants that joined the ranks of the nobility further strengthened their position in society. The Roman Empire collapsed in 1467 CE and was replaced by the Roman Catholic Church, approximately just shy of 500. Yeah, and I think that was around the time. It was pretty much when the Roman Empire had pretty much gone away, but that's when you saw the Justinian plague, and that's what pretty much just brought it to an end. All right, so where were we? Let's see. Yeah, so the merchants, that they could strengthen if they joined the ranks of the nobility, could further strengthen their position in society. This was also the time that you would have merchants that would actually wind up being more wealthy in possessions and money than they would be in land. So they may have more money than maybe, say, a noble person. So it hadn't started to become a problem yet between classes. But this is when you would see the rise of the merchant class. Now, Europe had experienced a remarkable period of expansion during the High Middle Ages, which ran from 1050 to 1300 CE. But that age of growth reached its limit in the latter part of the 19th century, or the 13th century, I'm sorry, which would be the late 1200s CE. By then, good farmland had been overworked, and new fields were proving only marginally productive. So you had people moving into cities because there were also, and one of the things I didn't put in my notes, there were also some strides in different farming techniques that could be more automated, if that is possible, but it was, that actually would cause them to let people go, so to speak. And so you had a lot of people that were homeless. And the fields just were not producing the amount of food that could feed the overpopulation from the population boom that had happened prior in the I guess the 100 years prior, or the 50 years prior, or whatever. So there was a lot of homelessness going on. Now, as the population began to surpass the capacity of the land to feed its inhabitants, famine was inevitable. And if and when a plague hit Europe, it would be devastating, as the people were already malnourished and starving. They now had the recipe for what we would refer to as the perfect storm. The pandemic's origins are disputed, originating either in Central Asia or Crimea, appearing in Crimea by 1347. In recent years, more research has emerged that show that the Black Death was most likely originated on the northwestern shores of the Caspian Sea. However, it is pretty much agreed that the plague was reportedly first introduced to Europeans, or Europe, I should say, via the Genoese traders from their port city of Kaffa in the Crimea, or in Crimea, in that same year. Survivors in Kaffa, escaping by sea, leaving behind streets covered with corpses, being fed on by feral animals. A quote from Heckler's 1837 Epidemics of the Middle Ages might sum it up the best. Tartary, Mesopotamia, Syria, Armenia are covered with dead bodies. The Kurds fled in vain into the mountains. In Camarena and I'm going to do my best, Caesarea, none were left alive. On the roads, in the camps, in the caravansaries, unburied bodies were alone to be seen, and few cities only remained, in an unaccountable manner, free from the plague. As the news of the plague was spreading, moving ahead of the plague, the devastating plague was moving east to west and wiping out up to half or more of the population. Now think about that. It wasn't like specifically going after certain people, like the young or the old, or there was even a plague outbreak that went for the ones that were in the best health. This was hitting everybody. So think for a minute, if you lived a 10 block area and everybody's in relatively good health, within 2 weeks, everybody in that 10 block area are either dead or they're dying. That's how devastating the plague was when it hit areas. It could devastate entire villages and entire towns. It could bounce over a town and not hit anybody. It could hit one or two, and we're going to get into that later. And then move along. It was very, very bizarre. So the effects of the contagion communicated from one people to another on the great roads. The icy hand of death was coming, and more horrifying, everyone knew it was coming. And that's where we're going to end it tonight. So I hope you enjoyed part 1. We'll get into some other things next week. But yeah, so I hope you learned some things. I did. And then we're going to do part 2 next week. And so Damon Barr says, I'm studying the world powers of the biblical times and current times. You know, I love history. I specifically love creepy history, but I absolutely love history. I'm what I consider myself an armchair historian. But yeah, I bet that is fun, Damon Bard. Actually, Mark, I think, and I could be wrong because Mark knows a whole lot about history. I think we were coming out of the Crusades prior to the Great Pestilence. I don't think it had been that long, because we were still having a lot of what they call the Great Schisms between the church power and things like that, which we'll get into eventually. But I think that the Crusades, if I remember correctly, on this lecture, had already started to come to an end. And guys, if you have the great courses, go check out the 24 part or the 24 episode lecture from Dr. Armstrong. It's very, very good. Yeah, it is a fascinating subject, and you're most welcome. And yes, it is kind of relevant to our times. And I thought, you know, kind of a cool winky dink to start off the year, that we would get into this. So I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you have a great rest of the week. We will see you next Wednesday here for part 2 of the Great Pestilence, and we'll get into some more information. We have a lot of content artists, I believe, Into the Fire, as well as Roots Bleed Red will be on Friday. We have Into the Fire on Saturday, as well as Tom's World. I'm not sure if the random show is going to be on this Saturday. And then we do have Brent, who is our Cemetery Joe, that will be doing the midnight movies. So that'll be fun. Then Sunday, who do we have Sunday? I don't think Chaos and them are on this Sunday. But then come Monday, we'll have Doomsday. Then back around to Tuesday, we'll have Miss Cindy. And like I said, we have a new content creator, Miss Geneva, which will be doing the Creepy Parlor. She will be coming soon. And I think she'll be on Tuesdays too. I'm not sure. But we'll get that advertised. And I have to give my voice a rest. And then we'll circle back around to next Wednesday. So pleasant nightmares, everybody. See you guys later. Bye.